Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Bloom. In a recent IRS proposal, just under 300 pages long, brokers would be required to go through the same information reporting exercise for the sale or exchange of digital assets as they do with securities. Joining me to focus on exactly what you need to know is Jamison Sites, a principal in PwC's Global Structuring Financial Services practice. Jamison, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of these regulations, I want to ask my favorite question, which is why? What is the impetus for this guidance?
Well, I think on its face, it's the infrastructure bill that passed about a year and a half ago, right? And I may be fuzzy on those dates, but peeling back a little bit deeper, I think it's about revenue raising to kind of offset some of the costs of the infrastructure bill. Okay. There's a large tax gap due to a lack of information reporting around digital asset transactions. And I think these are the regulations that put into effect the changes to the code.
All right. And I know you've been talking to people about this. So what has the reaction been?
Wow. They're quite expansive.
Yeah.
In terms of scope and definition of digital asset, scope and definition of broker, as well as then the whole reporting framework. There are some, fallbacks and kind of, a long implementation timeline, et cetera. But general first reaction is kind of, wow.
Okay. And let's get into what a broker is or who a broker is and what the broker needs to do.
Can I define a broker by what is not a broker?
Absolutely.
No, only half in jest, but a broker broadly defined is going to be a person that holds themselves out regularly to, basically intermediate and do digital asset transactions on behalf of a customer. It introduces this concept of the digital asset middleman, and then whether or not they are facilitating customer sale transactions directly or indirectly. So there's a lot of questions about what all gets scraped into that definition of broker, especially in the DeFi world, okay. Which is decentralized finance. That's kind of the smart contracts of crypto, the distributed autonomous organizations. These regulations really take aim at that and question whether or not they are decentralized. There's a lot of presumption rules and procedures around, whether or not certain persons can effectuate control of those platforms. And if they can, then they will presumably fall into these regulations.
Let's get into the specific transactions because you're saying this is really broad, right? Mm-hmm. So what exactly is it going to cover in terms of transactions? At
first you're going to say your sale transactions, but this is information reporting, so it's not just the sale. We need to know the cost basis, so we need to know the acquisition history. So brokers, if you're a broker, you're going to be having to report, all these inbound, outbound transactions, and they get very explicit in terms of what will be on the form to be named. I think there's people circulating 1099-DA right. is the rumor, but some of the items on there will be a transaction hash, wallet addresses. So these are things that will bring into the scope of information reporting a lot more than what's traditionally out there. And I'll also take a note to say that in terms of what is a digital asset, because that's important, that's also very broad. Essentially anything that utilizes a distributed ledger to effectuate the transaction. So they're including stablecoins explicitly. They're including NFTs, and really anything that even, private and permissioned blockchains. It doesn't have to write to the public blockchain every transaction to be considered a digital asset subject to these reporting rules.
So are there brokers out there who may not know that they are brokers?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest questions. And if clients aren't asking us, we're asking them, do you know if you're a broker? Because it is so expansive. So it's really prudent to say, okay, I think I'm not a broker, but I need right. to document why I'm not a broker because I kind of look like a middleman. Maybe I let people with crypto wallets connect to my platform, but I'm a service provider, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of detailed rules about presumptions and whether or not, the broker is in the position to know information about their customer. So it gets very complicated. And if you don't walk through all the necessary steps, you may be tripped into being a broker, but it really needs to be documented.
So I'd like to go back to the issue of revenue for a second, because I'm curious about how much money is at stake. Like what is the revenue expected and what is it that the industry is worth?
The industry right now, at least if you look at the market cap of the tokens, which is a very pure way to look at industry value, it's sitting in a little above $1 trillion. I think at market peak, it topped out just shy of $3 trillion. The cost to implement these regulations is estimated by the IRS to be just shy of $1 billion.
Okay.
750 million, and that's kind of a low-end estimate. Anyone's real guess in terms of what the compliance, like what the revenue raise will be, like what will be reported on these transactions. I think you have a lot of taxpayers that may not file a tax return because they don't get something in the mail that says you had $500 worth of transactions,
right?
$1,000 worth of capital gains, 1099-B, right? Send that to your tax return preparer. This is a new industry, and those rules are still being developed. And there's a whole industry of crypto tax software services out there to help you aggregate all of your wallets and make sure that you've captured all your transactions. We pull up congressional budget estimates, but I think they may be wildly off. But plus or minus 100%. I don't know.
Okay. So these are proposed regulations. There's a comment period. There's going to be public hearing. So taking all of that into consideration, what are the next steps?
Well, I think the next steps are to figure out if these are going to apply to you.
Okay.
Because regardless of the implementation time and the comment periods, the proposed regulations in the preamble anchored back to the infrastructure bill, which codified January 1st, 2023.
Right.
Is when the information, the transactions subject to reporting was supposed to start, to be filed on a 2024 1099 form variant. But these regulations took a while to come out. They cleared White House review over 6 months ago,
okay.
And they kind of were a little bit slow to get because they're so expansive. I think there are a lot of moving parts. But on the face of it, you have essentially until 2026 filings. So you'll be reporting 2025 transactions if you're a broker.
Okay.
So you got a good implementation time. But again, it anchors back to acquisitions dated starting from 1/1/2023. So It's now. So if you don't have the systems ready to capture the transactions that you're currently processing as a proposed broker, regardless of how these rules get finalized, I'm not sure that date will move because that's in the code. So I think they say you're on notice for those.
In terms of the work that's involved here, okay, you're figuring out if you're a broker. If you don't know, you're a broker, and then you're getting your systems into place and then figuring all of that out. So what kind of a lift are we looking at here just to get to information reporting?
You're implementing a new reporting system. The decimal precision of traditional reporting systems don't go 18 to the right of the decimal like many digital assets do. So if you don't have that fundamental piece, your existing reporting system's not going to capture the transactions accurately. You also need to figure out and implement how to scrape on-chain data. There's some presumptions out there about whether or not you're a broker that depends on the outbound transactions and whether or not they're to associated wallet addresses of US brokers. Unless you have a data provider, some kind of blockchain analytic firm, to help you understand who you're interacting with,
right.
You may not even know what your reporting obligations are because that's the litmus test for US broker definition.
Right. All right. Well, Jamison, thank you for this insight, your comments, and most of all, thank you for reading the almost 300 pages. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you want more on this topic, take a look at the PwC Tax Insight included in the description of this episode. And thank you as always for watching, and stay with Policy on Demand for the latest developments in Washington and around the world. Take care.